How much more intense do you think this episode would be if I filmed it like this? Welcome back to Storytime. You're watching part 4 of my MCU Retrospective series. Today we're looking at Thor, the ancient Norse deity turned B-list comic book hero turned Hulk of glorious, glorious man-meat. As always, we'll be looking at character and how the movie's story comes together. Similar to Incredible Hulk, this movie seems to not have the greatest reputation among fans, but does manage to have one of the more competent stories in the series. At least until the Genocide stuff.
Hello!
As always, we're going to be nice and thorough in our coverage. I mean, who wouldn't be? So if you're worried about spoilers or don't want to hear anything I have to say about this movie,
Leave us.
Thor is a 2011 film directed by Kenneth Branagh. He is probably the most accomplished director in the MCU, having helmed six Shakespeare, having helmed half a dozen Shakespeare adaptations and various other films. He is, of course, also an accomplished actor, famous for his bravado performances in his Shakespeare movies. You also know him from Harry Potter, where he plays a handsome teacher or something. The film was written by these guys, who at the time were all mostly known for their work on TV, including The Sarah Connor Show and weirdly The Simpsons, and also the worst film adaptation of the new millennium, but that's not what we're here to talk about, thank goodness. Despite having 11 writers in some capacity or other, the movie's story is pretty cohesive. Our hero, Thor, is banished to Earth from the space kingdom of Asgard for basically provoking a war with another space kingdom. In being banished, he loses his powers and is declared unworthy of his magic hammer, Miller, and spends the rest of the movie trying to be better than he was. Now let's dig in a little deeper. Thor is obviously our protagonist. When we first meet him, he is about to be named King of Asgard, but when, 3 enemy guys show up to try and steal an icebox that was stolen from them and get horribly killed in the process, he goes to their planet with a few of his friends to basically murder their whole society. As I've said, this leads to his banishment. Character-wise, he is clearly confident and shown to be a good fighter, but he is also pretty arrogant, reckless, quick to anger, generally unthinking of those around him, and not ungenocidal. We'll come back to this. Because of these things, his father Odin declares him unworthy of the magic hammer, rendering him basically powerless. So we have the setup for a clear enough plot. Thor needs to locate his hammer so he can get his life back, and when he finds he can no longer wield it, he is forced to confront himself and grow. The plot is nice enough to give him a lady to help with this. Jane is an astrophysicist from Earth. She is investigating some type of atmospheric phenomenon which ends up being the Bifrost channel through which Thor is banished. We learn her father was apparently also a scientist. Once Thor and the hammer appear, S.H.I.E.L.D. show up and confiscate all of Jane's research, which she is justifiably upset about and wants to get back. To get it back, she agrees to take Thor to the site where his hammer is landed and S.H.I.E.L.D. has set up base. But mostly she is just instantly and unbearably attracted to the thunder. A thing the movie mostly treats as silly because, well, otherwise it would be too hot for Disney Corporation shareholders.
I'm a horny Michael.
Loki is Thor's younger brother, though it is later revealed he is actually the kidnapped/forcibly adopted son of the Frost Giant King. He is described as a master magician, and his capabilities include duplicating himself, making himself invisible, and apparently mind control. He is smart and manipulative, and as it turns out, secretly emotionally unstable to a genocidal degree, ultimately exploiting Thor's absence and Odin's uncontrollable sleeping to usurp the throne of Asgard. Of anyone, he probably experiences the most dramatic internal conflict, since the revelation of his true ancestry ultimately drives him to try and destroy all of them. The unfortunate thing is that it kind of all happens at once, mostly off screen, and doesn't really come up again in the other movies. Odin, also described as the Allfather, is the king of Asgard. His primary purpose is to provide exposition via voiceover narration and to instigate the plot. He banishes Thor, and when he falls into the Odin sleep, opens the door for Loki's later actions. He is wise but temperamental. Rounding out our characters, we have Jane's science partner and surrogate father Eric, who tells Jane not to do things and provides some exposition about Norse mythology since he is himself ambiguously Nordic. Magic Idris Elba, who operates the Bifrost, various warrior stereotypes including eater, samurai, swashbuckler, and girl, and of course Agent Guy. Nick Fury shows up in the credits with a blue thing that turns Loki on a lot. Overall, the characters feel a little more balanced with each other than in other MCU entries so far. I think part of this has to do with the dual locations. Since the movie takes place on both Earth and Asgard, we are forced to split our time between them, and this is handled pretty well, I think. We also know what people want, for the most part, and what they are capable of doing. Thor wants to go home, and later to kind of just be a good boy. Loki wants to control Asgard and apparently deal with his identity dysmorphia, and Jane wants to do her laundry on Thor's interstellar washboards. The resulting story is pretty solid for the most part, even if it's a little rote. And the reason it's a little rote is because it's basically just a Little Mermaid. Maybe you didn't notice, but Thor is kind of like a certain animated cartoon from a while back.
The similarities are subtle but many.
Thor lives in a mystical realm unknown to humanity save for legend. It is ruled by a wise but temperamental elderly king who is prone to exaggerated punishments. Thor has a sibling who is jealous of him. He does not like to follow his father's rules and is prone to rebellion. He breaks the rules with his group of ragtag friends who are not punished in any way, although he is. He goes to the world of the humans, where one of them falls in love with him despite him not really telling her anything about himself. He spends a total of
3 days
in this place. He gets into funny hijinks because he doesn't understand human customs. A meddling magic enemy of a different species, capable of disguising himself in the human world, seeks to keep Thor out of the realm forever through lies and deceit. He also temporarily overthrows the king. After a cataclysmic battle that results in the defeat of the meddling magic enemy, Thor and his love are separated by an uncrossable gulf. The only difference is that at the end, Thor doesn't get magicked to Earth to be with Jane. And there's no musical numbers. I know this is obviously kind of reductive, but on rewatching Thor, the similarities, both of plot and theme, between the two movies kept popping up.
Subtle but many.
They're both fish out of water stories with an unlikely romance at the center. They also kind of share certain fairy tale sensibilities. The Little Mermaid was of course based on the fairy tale written by Hans Christian Andersen, and Thor makes a lot of overt references to how the legends of the Norse gods are basically fairy tales for children now. Because of how both stories are framed in genre and the tropes they use, there will inevitably be certain superficial or even deeper running similarities between them, which is fine. But the key difference between Thor and The Little Mermaid reveals an important weakness in the former, and that difference is the intention of the protagonists. In The Little Mermaid, Ariel has a clear desire to live in the human world and to pursue Eric as a love interest. To do this, she enters into a bargain with Ursula in which she trades her voice for human legs. If she can get Eric to kiss her within 3 days, her voice will be returned to her and she can keep her legs. If not, she will become one of Ursula's mucus people. Even if to us it is a fool's bargain, the stakes are very clear, and therefore all of Ariel's actions are very highly motivated. Thor also has a clear desire, at first. It is to retrieve his hammer, which it seems symbolizes to him a return to normality and the potential to reconcile with his father. So, for this portion of the movie, his actions are also motivated. He leaves Jane and the others at the diner when he hears where the hammer fell with the intention of retrieving it, and then makes a bargain with Jane to that end. Then, of course, he learns he cannot wield the hammer. This revelation very naturally leads to disappointment in Thor and a sense of hopelessness. This is compounded when Loki comes to him saying that Odin is dead and that he can never return to Asgard. Fine, but now is where things start getting hazy, predictably so for the MCU. The story wants Thor to have his power restored by the end of the movie, but it's taken away any motivation he had to make himself worthy. If he can't ever go home, why try to wield the hammer again? The movie doesn't know what to do with him, and so it is forced to invent some extraneous reasons involving an unrelated existential threat to get Thor up off the couch. Oh, wait. Sorry, I'm being told that actually Thor gets visited by the stereotype fighters.
Mamma mia! Hutsman! Yeehaw! Arr, me mateys. Arr.
Who it has been established want him to return to Asgard and who inform him he has been deceived. Loki learns of this and sends the furnace robot to destroy them so his treachery isn't discovered, thereby allowing for circumstances in which Thor can heroically sacrifice himself, allowing him to become worthy again. So, actually, the plot's pretty good.
Except for...
Hello!
Se alguém quer vir pro samba, olha a roda como a fé.
If history has taught us anything, it's that we love those Odinson brothers. And what's not to love? There's Thor with his fabulous hair, body, voice, and eyes, and Loki with his...
high fastening pants.
pallid skin and sarcasm. Okay, I've never really understood what the Loki appeal was, but I get that it's a thing, and who am I to judge? But, you know, both of them are pretty messed up, right? Let's go with the low-hanging fruit first. Loki is a genocidal psychopath. That's it, that's all I wanted to say. He's got his own show now, and I just wanted to remind everyone where he started. But we're here, so let's unpack it. When we meet Loki, he seems mild-mannered enough. In fact, he doesn't seem much of anything, though we later learn that he is incredibly jealous of Thor and sought to sabotage him. One gets the sense that, likely, had things remained the same, he might have eventually staged some kind of coup anyway. But things don't say the same, because Loki learns that he is somehow a secret frost giant, a revelation which apparently shatters his entire psyche and leads him to want to destroy the frost giant homeworld after luring his real father, their king, to Asgard and murdering him so that Odin will approve of him or something. But he's got a good heart. This movie does have story issues after all, and they all show up in the last 20 minutes after Thor's fight with the Destroyer on Earth. These issues have to do with Loki's plan to win Odin's love and respect, which is banish Thor forever, then have him and other Asgardians summarily killed, orchestrate the infiltration of Asgard by a hostile foreign leader in order to kill him, completely destroy that foreign civilization. You know, the very thing Thor was banished for in the first place. In this part of the movie, Loki is portrayed as basically being totally insane, so his plan doesn't have to make logical sense. Even so, I'm willing to buy that if his inner desire is to supplant Thor, doing the things that Thor did but better might be something he latches onto in his mania. What I have trouble with is that it all kind of comes out of nowhere. Up until sending the Destroyer, his actions are pretty calculated and controlled, obviously part of a plan. He is a threat precisely because he isn't temperamental and is so skilled at manipulation. He's playing the long game. But at this point in the movie, he just goes off the chain, genocidally so. Even though the Frost Giants are coded as villains, they are still a sovereign people who have respected a truce for a millennium. They have no ability to attack Asgard even if they wanted to, so any attack on them can't really be justified. I think this turn is a mistake. Loki is clearly the first really interesting villain in the MCU so far. Not that corporate pettiness isn't exciting. This is because he is the first to have any meaningful connection to the protagonist, the first to show any sense of internal conflict, and the first to have a compelling reason for his antagonism. It makes sense that fans would find him appealing to watch and want him to show up again, and from a story perspective, you're going to need recurring antagonists in a story as complex as the MCU, preferably with arcs of their own, including possible redemption. But attempted genocide is a gross thing to try and redeem. The fact that later movies basically forget this and take the line that Loki isn't really all that bad, really, he's just misunderstood, kind of rubs me the wrong way. Obviously, characters are allowed and encouraged to change, but attempted genocide is probably one of the harder things to walk back. Speaking of, Thor is also a genocidal maniac. Remember at the beginning of the movie when 3 guys break into the Asgardian vault, are immediately killed, and Thor decides the appropriate punishment is to violate a treaty, reignite an old war, and destroy what is left of their people? and that by the end of the movie, none of this matters because Thor almost sacrificed himself for 3 humans and 4 Asgardians who were getting away anyway. The film basically does the same justification of this as it does for Loki, and it's not that bad, only over a period of minutes rather than multiple movies. You could also argue that Loki was temporarily insane due to a severe dissociative episode brought on by the existential trauma of learning his true heritage. Thor is only caught up in bloodlust, something he appears to regularly indulge in and which others seem to value in him. Yeah, let's make that guy our hero. I get making him impulsive, arrogant, and reckless. I even get making him fond of a fight. But taking it to this extreme is both unnecessary to the plot and, again, a really hard thing to credibly walk back. Odin can banish Thor for nothing more than violating his command, especially if he is trying to teach him a lesson, which is that's what he's hinted at he's doing. But having Thor brutally murder a bunch of guys who are just protecting themselves from clearly hostile invaders feels pretty flippant, especially when Thor needs to be worthy of Miller like an hour later. I don't want to keep beating this horse.
Stop! He's already dead!
Basically, Thor and Loki are equally and needlessly problematic with regards to their murderous impulses, and also it's a little weird that Disney feels okay with having not 1 but 2 attempted genocides in 1 movie. We need to talk about Thor and Jane. Honestly, probably the weakest major story element of anything. It's been established by me that the MCU really struggles to depict intimate relationships. Basically, the guys have girls because they occasionally need someone to do emotional labor in the plot or to provide them with MacGuffins, and the girls have guys because every woman needs a man to stand by. And really, Thor is no different. Except it's creepier.
Tell me more, did you get very far?
We've already talked a little bit about Jane and what she wants.
And I need you now tonight.
I should say it's fine for the story that Jane is so attracted to Thor that it interferes with her brain function. Women in stories are allowed to feel attraction. The problem is it's not ever really developed beyond this. Thor is hot, so Jane helps him, then he gets one of her notebooks back and serves breakfast with his sleeves rolled up, so he's her guy forever. Any actual bonding they do is almost all off-screen, in a 50-mile car ride we don't see, and an all-night conversation we see like a minute of, and which mostly consists of Thor intellectually flexing. Because it's not developed on Jane's side of things, it's harder to believe that she has this cosmically significant relationship with a space god, especially when, for the most of their time together, the only reasonable explanation she has for his behavior is that he's a crazy hobo. Congratulations, movie. Now we're in suspension of disbelief territory. While things feel a little tenuous on Jane's end, they're downright creepy for Thor. This is mostly because never once does Thor stop to think about what he's doing with Jane. Thor is a literal space god, Jane, a regular mortal. So the power dynamics here are what I would call unbalanced. But since Thor never really does anything to take advantage of that, it's probably fine. What's weird is that Thor kind of acts like getting someone like Jane is his due.
Well, she was good, you know what I mean?
When they first properly meet after he is out of the hospital, Thor doesn't really appear to consider Jane at all. To wit, he wanders around her house half naked and doesn't react when she and the intern get all flustered. After breakfast, he does appear to think about her, and he kisses her hand goodbye, which again causes her to get flustered, but which he doesn't think twice about. By the time he is released from S.H.I.E.L.D. and they are talking on the roof, he seems to like explaining things to her which, to him, are as basic as the solar system is to us. At the end, he leaves for Asgard, telling her he will return sometime, apparently with the full expectation that she will just be there waiting.
It's all coming back to me now.
Am I alone in saying this feels a little weird? Thor is either profoundly unself-aware or just kind of takes it as a given that an Earth lady will want him so bad. If, for example, we see that on Asgard it is common to not fully dress when around new people, the shirt thing can be written off as a funny cultural misstep. Since it isn't, we kind of have to assume that Thor isn't not showing off, that or humans are so far below him that he doesn't even think about it, like you don't think about it when you towel off in front of your cat. I get Jane being attracted to Thor. For the most part. And I get Thor having interest in Jane. What I struggle with is that he continues to pursue it. I know for a lot of the movie Thor thinks Earth is his home now, but he kind of indulges Jane even before that, and certainly after his powers are restored. I hate to say it, but being a brutally hot, all-knowing space god who easily finds girls who drop everything to help you out and who get visibly excited by your presence kind of feels like the same gross incel fantasies that Iron Man indulges. So there's that. Here are some other thoughts I have about Thor. 1. Loki is an Iceman, and this makes no sense. The movie shows that he can change his physical appearance at will to look more like an Asgardian, something which occurs immediately when Odin finds him as a baby, but his touch doesn't result in frostbite for other people, and also he never grows beyond human size. He makes more sense as like a half frost giant, not the heir of the frost giant king whom Odin kidnaps. 2. All beings in the galaxy speak modern English. Okay, maybe not the frost giants, and as an audience we just got their stuff like auto-translated or something, but they definitely speak English on Asgard because that is the language Thor uses to communicate with Idris Elba when he is on Earth within earshot of Earthlings. This is, of course, petty, and I get why they just went with everybody speaks English, but it's also a little weird. The timetable of this movie is over 1,000 years, so what language were the Asgardians speaking at the beginning when they have that first fight with the Frost Giants? Is English technically their language, brought to Earth by some rogue Asgardian in the past? Do Earth languages and Asgard languages evolve at the same pace? This is what I'm talking about. It doesn't make any sense. 3. The Odin sleep needs an explanation. In the movie, it just kind of happens, but we don't know anything about what causes it, how it works, or what it does. Having it not be an established thing makes it feel very convenient when it happens, and never getting any explanation of it makes it feel very convenient when it ends. It's only an artificial tool concocted by the plot to let Loki be king without actually harming Odin, which Disney feels is probably too evil, though trying to murder a whole civilization twice isn't. 4. The design of Asgard is really pretty cool. This is the first epically scaled MCU movie, and the work they did in making Asgard feel that way paid off for me. 5. Everybody's powers are also pretty well defined through action. We see the kinds of things Thor can do with the hammer in the early Frost Giant fight, and even though how it works is basically magic, its origins are explained to us, and it has limits. We also see the type of actual magic Loki can perform. The same thing is true for the general lore of this movie with things like the Bifrost. Everything we need to know is established, if maybe sometimes clumsily, so when they come up again, it doesn't feel like the story is making up new rules. And best of all, there are no surprise power reveals during the final fight, something which will always happen in the future. 6. This is officially our first MCU movie to end with an apocalyptic space laser. We'll be keeping a running tally. 7. The introduction of Arrow Man mostly works. At least, I'm glad he doesn't just show up in Avengers. But I find it incredibly silly that he uses arrows. We aren't given a justification for this in the film, so it feels weird if you don't know he's like a character, like I didn't. The movie puts a weird emphasis on him, so I was like, oh, I guess this is a guy. But then we never see him again, so I was like, maybe not. I think he needs to show up again at the end with the furnace robot so we can see a little more development. 8. The furnace robot has a pretty cool look. 9. Most of the action sequences in this movie are really disorienting to watch. They often look pretty muddy and are edited in a way that individual actions are hard to follow. Also, every shot in this movie is a Dutch angle, and that kind of broke me. And I think that's about it. Overall, I was kind of surprised going over this movie again how clear it is for the most part. It has significant issues, specifically Jane and Thor's weird relationship and Thor and Loki being reformed genociders. But the story has a plot that can be followed and some interesting lore with all the Asgard stuff. So, good job, I guess? Join me next time when we'll be talking about Captain America, the first Avenger. Good night.
It's all just an act.
And a gorgeous head of hair.